Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast.
Keep in mind that comparison is the thief of joy, and that it's such an old saying, but it's so, it really is true, because just because somebody is doing well doesn't take away what you're doing, and it doesn't mean that you can't do well. And I have to remind myself, like, we're all in the same battle, and you can be happy for others.
Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today in this music and mental health series, I'm talking with Alyssa, Coco and Matt Merritt from the singer and songwriter indie pop band Roses and Revolutions. Our topics, as usual, are creativity and music and their relation to mental health, with a focus on what challenges our well-being and our creativity and what Alyssa and Matt have found that actually helps. We discuss how Alyssa has learned to cope with her OCD and how both she and Matt navigate the challenges of constant comparisons, the deluge of performance data, and the pressure of faster and faster song cycle requirements. So, with no further ado, I bring you Roses and Revolutions. Well, here I am with Alyssa and Matt, and it's very nice to see you both. But I might start with just a little overview of what my research and my experience has taught me about your industry, because it's very interesting in that overall, when the research looks at the relationship between creativity and mental health, it finds no relationship. In other words, on average, people who are more creative in any industry are no more likely to have mental ill health than others. And this is like pretty contrary to the cultural myths about particularly your industry. Now, having said that, the mental health outcomes in your industry are pretty bad. And so clearly it's not related to creativity per se. And you can see that when you look at the data, because it's not just the musicians who struggle, it's everyone in the industry.
Yes.
Whether you're looking at roadies or promoters or event organisers, etc., etc. So there's something about what we call the psychosocial factors within the industry that cause the problem, not necessarily the individuals involved. And that's a tough thing to deal with in reality, and I'm sure I'm looking forward to how you navigate it. But it's also good in a way, because it means we don't have to. It's not solely about fixing people; it's about thinking more strategically. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and practically.
Yes.
So, and another thing I'd love to talk to you about is creativity itself. How you go about it, what your thoughts are about it. It's an abiding interest of mine, and it'd be wonderful to hear your take on it. So why don't we start with your experiences of mental health in the music industry? And it could be your own or others, or what you've observed around you. I don't really care where this goes. It'll be interesting wherever it goes.
Yeah. Would you like me to start?
Yeah, go.
I have been a big advocate of, protecting your mental health and a balance, I think, when it comes to just in general. I personally have struggled and been diagnosed with OCD, and that has been specifically hard for me when it comes to traveling. I very much am worried about getting sick and things like that. So that has been a direct correlation for me, with touring, eating at restaurants, staying at hotels, things like that have been always very difficult for me. I have learned to manage it quite well, with therapy and with some medication, and just, I think, exposure therapy a little bit, and I worked on that a lot with my therapist. And but in general, it's like you're saying, I think the industry as a whole experiences a lot of mental health issues, a lot with the sleep deprivation, a lot with traveling, a lot with insecurity financially, or just being uncertain of where you're going to be next week or next month or next year, or, and it's an ever changing industry. So the stability isn't always there. It's not like you're a doctor and they're always going to need you, or, something like that. Or, so that's always something that we struggle with. I mean, I struggle with anyways, but I'm sure he can elaborate a little bit on how he feels about your mental health.
Before Matt dives in, can I
Yeah.
I'd like to probe a few little things there if I can.
Yeah, please.
OCD, for people who don't know, is obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a kind of anxiety disorder.
Yes.
And talk about choosing a work life that was going to test OCD.
You're telling me.
Because the key thing there is trying to control variables, trying to keep things in order and have things be a little bit more predictable. And yet, now, I'm sure there's a reason that you chose that, and we'll come to that. But you also mentioned exposure, and again, our listeners may not know what that referred to. But basically, the idea is learning to face our fears, to actually be exposed to them, but pairing them with ways of relaxing. Is that the sort of approach you've taken?
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
So it's basically training in your nervous system that doesn't have to be afraid of these situations.
Yes.
Yeah. Bit like getting back on the horse. If you get thrown off a horse and you never get on, you'll be afraid of horses forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. I'm guessing, and hopefully I'm not putting words in your mouth, Alyssa. The cost-benefit analysis of you choosing to be in the music industry was such that it was obvious that's what I want to do, even though it involved all these things that were clearly stresses for you. Hotel rooms, unpredictability. Is that right? Was the drive was so strong?
Absolutely. I mean, my anxiety and my OCD is secondary to the drive and the passion I have for music, which sometimes it kind of clashes a little bit, but then I'm reminded of why I do what I do and why I'm doing it, like why I'm there, and the reasons I am defeating it, in my own brain, I guess. So yes, the reward is worth it.
Yeah, and we might come back to that because this is a general feature of creative process. It's not easy, and if for us to create anything significant, generally speaking, we encounter impasses and all kinds of problems, lots of uncertainties, and as a species, we don't like that much. No. It creates anxiety, but creative people have what has been called a higher tolerance of ambiguity. So you can kind of learn to sit with the uncertainty for longer and longer, and the capacity to do that opens up creative process. So, famously, John Keats, the Romantic poet, called it a negative capability. This ability to sit with uncertainties and discomforts and not have to reach for a quick solution. He thought that was mankind's highest capability. Yeah. But we'll come back to that thing about passion and so on, I think, in a bit. But I'm very curious, Matt, about what's going on in your head.
Yeah. I think like Alyssa said, I remember when we first started touring, you definitely had a lot on your plate to deal with that. For me, it's in the music industry, which I'm sure there's a lot of other industries too, is just a constant comparing yourself to your peers, to everyone else in the industry, and also to, you're like as a group, I mean, when we, had our first song go viral, it was like every release after that was compared to that. And it's like, if you don't achieve that, you feel like a failure. And it's like, it's just constant comparing, and it's like, if you are shooting, comparing yourself to, there's some stuff that we all compare ourselves to that are just unachievable. And it's just like, if that is what your hopes are, you're setting yourself up for failure to begin with. And it's just like this onward cycle. there's also some, you know, in the music industry now, it's always like, what's next? It's like you work forever on a song, you put it out, and now the song cycle right now is so short. It's like, you know, you have maybe a week or two if the song doesn't blow up. Everyone's like, all right, what's the next song? And it's just over and over and over, and it takes its toll. Yeah, it's exhausting.
Yeah, there's a few rich veins here for us to talk about, I think. Let's start with the comparison piece, and I know that, and social media, you know, no doubt absolutely amplifies this, right? Because you have this constant availability of comparison, and it's curated comparison. You know what I mean? Like, people aren't necessarily just presenting themselves as they are. They're presenting these very idealized, you know.
And also too, now as artists, like, yes, there's labels and stuff like that, but more than I feel like in the past, it's like the artist has all their data. Like, we literally in real time can see our Spotify streams, you know. So aside from the social media numbers, we can see in real time how each song is streaming and how everybody, and then you can also go to everybody else's Spotify and see how their songs are streaming. So like you are like bombarded with all these numbers every day that you just keep, you know. And so it's like, it's so easy. Well, as our friend that's on the same label, we should be, you know what I mean? And it's just like, oh, it's so easy to, you know, get caught in that, you know.
So I might talk to that a little bit, and then I'd like to ask you both how you seek to manage that, how you navigate it. But just a few thoughts. In my consulting in the creative industries generally, one of the things that, you know, we explore is when our sense of self is brought into the foreground. In other words, we become self-conscious. That's quite destructive of creative process.
Yeah.
Right. Because without going into too much detail, the sense of self is a major ongoing construction. It takes a lot of neural, you know, brain resources. There's no real self in there, actually. It's this construction that we have to maintain. And there's good reasons we have this sort of ego, but it's not. But it takes a lot. And if it feels threatened, then creativity goes out the window, because it's all hands on deck for survival. Yeah. So it's very destructive, that self-referencing. And the contrast to it, as I'm sure you both know, is that when you're non-self-conscious, that's when things really flow.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? So you become immersed, absorbed. In fact, I kind of define happiness as this sort of relative absence of self-concern. You know, that when we're more outward focused, basically, on the world or on what you're writing, or you know, so it's not about self, which, if you think about it, is like the polar opposite of modern life.
So interesting. Yeah, it makes so much sense.
Yeah, because, you know, it's the sort of cultivated narcissism of the current age, right? So there's that part, the comparative part, which is very, very difficult. And then the other piece there is the rate of turnover. And again, this is a really general phenomenon in modern life. It's this sense of haste and speed, and it keeps turning your attention away from the doing to this comparative thing, right? I don't want to lead the witness too much, though, so I want to come back to you guys and say, well, how have you've obviously thought deeply about this. How have you what strategies, what ways have you got of dealing with it?
Well, keep in mind that comparison is the thief of joy, and that it's such an old saying, but it's so, you know, it really is true, because just because somebody is doing well doesn't take away what you're doing, and it doesn't mean that you can't do well. And I have to remind myself, like, we're all in the same battle, and you can be happy for others doing well, and still work on yourself, and your time will come. And I've always been a big believer in that. Like, you don't have to shoot other people down or feel jealous or feel like you're not good enough just because their time came before yours, So, and you also kind of learn from those people. I think we can learn from our peers and our people in that same space. It's inspiring to me when I do see somebody, crushing it on social media, and I'm like, oh, okay, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. And then it kind of spirals that way. So I try to use it as motivation more than loathing and getting in my own head about it.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of approach it day to day.
Yeah. I got a lot of stuff. I mean, right now I'm bright red because I just came back from a run. I mean, exercise has always been a thing, but that still didn't, I don't know, fix it for me. Like, all the no sleep and nightmares and worry, it doesn't go away on one run. But one thing that I think both of us have found comfort in recently is, I think, like, a lot of indie artists, it's like, as an indie artist, you get multiple victories. I would say, like, in our case, it would, if you get a couple a year, they come and go so fast, and there's so much more time where you are feeling negative about yourself and comparing. And so, like, we really early on started celebrating those little victories, even if it was like, hey, our song got on a Spotify playlist, or hey, we got the opening spot on the store, or we have a song in a TV show, with our family and friends, we throw a little party and just, like, really celebrate those little victories. And that, I think, helped too. The other thing that we've been doing recently is, finding other areas of the music industry too. So, there was a period of time where it was, if our original music, isn't on the charts, isn't doing this, it would just be day after day of obsessing over it, refreshing Spotify, checking our numbers, feeling depressed, feeling like a failure, feeling down. And I think, since then we started writing with other people. So then, even if it's not our song, it might be someone else's song. And then you might get a call one day, hey, that song you wrote is doing okay. And, stuff like that. We, don't talk about this with Roses and Revolutions, but being full-time musicians, we will do cover band gigs, and those not under our name, but I mean, this summer we have a show for 4,000 people, and it's nice to just get on stage, play music, and not worry about ticket sales. And then you can go back to your original music and feel, we got into music because we love it.
You feel fulfilled because you're still playing music on stage.
Like I think you said, like, we got into music because it made us feel good mentally. And then as you do it over the years professionally, something flips. And
so it's work.
Yeah. So, like, if you're headlining your own original band and you're planning a tour and you see, oh man, there's a couple cities that are very low ticket sales, you feel really down, you feel really stressed, the agent's stressed, everyone's stressed. So once in a while, playing like a cover band gig, under the radar, it fills that void of, I'm playing music in front of a lot of people, and it makes you feel good mentally. So stuff like that, I think, like, finding these other areas, because when everything was so dialed into how was our single doing, how was our original music doing, that was the only thing we were checking, and it was, it was tough to have, everything, like, depending on that one thing.
Yeah, that's really smart, actually. I think, because the just checking on your own progress all the time just keeps the focus returning back to this comparative thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's just always people who are going to be, unless you're Taylor Swift, it's just going to be a really negative comparison, right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
And go on.
No, I'm going to say, funny enough, that cover gig that we're doing is all Taylor Swift music.
So we get a little taste of, like, what it's like to be her for a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're spot on.
Yeah. And the other thing I was thinking about, there's a tendency to think about creativity as a highly individualist thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely not the case for the vast majority of creativity. It's generally, originally it was a tribal thing, you know, like literally in a village, and it was collaborative. And so I think that dropping back into just, you know, doing cover band work and being with other musicians and having fun basically is really smart. And it doesn't matter whether it's music or whether it's the other thing is just being with like-minded people,
Yes.
and being stimulated by like-minded people. This is a really strong predictor of creative outcome, right? Because when we become too insular, it becomes a real problem. Because again, it keeps focusing us back on self. Yeah. That's really interesting, isn't it? I think it's much more difficult these days. I mean, the whole social media thing is a problem, right? As we know, there's a big uptick in youth mental health, particularly young women, and it's all this comparison stuff, right? Impossible comparisons.
Always.
You know, so we have to change our appearance to fit some sort, and keep changing it to fit some sort of impossible, ageless, alleged norm.
The ageless time. You cannot age as a woman in this industry.
No.
That is one thing that, you know, it's like, that's something you can't help. We all age, and we're all every year getting older every day. And it's almost like the industry expects women to be like, wait, here's your thresholds. Where are you gonna be? You know, and it's a scary thing, but also like, who cares? I've yet to this day had someone ask my age.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? But that does point to also the problems of discrimination and sexism in the industry, which I know is a big issue for the mental health of women in the industry. I heard this thing I don't know whether it's true, on Instagram recently, that there's a whole substream of it about, you know, telling young women not to drink from straws because it creates wrinkles.
Yep.
Is that right?
I've heard it. I've heard it all.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. You know a lot more
Hold
than
on
me.
1 second. But yeah, I've heard it all.
Yeah. And you know, in your travels, as it were, and you've been around the industry for quite a while. What are some of the things that you, like, as it were, not so much about yourselves now, but looking at others? What sort of mistakes do you see them making with respect to that sends them down a poor mental health path? What are some of the things that you see that people do?
Oh, that's a very good question.
I know.
I just off the top of my head.
I'm sure we've made all the mistakes.
Yeah, right.
Well, maybe you can talk about yourselves then. That's fine. But I just want to get that sense for the listeners, you know, about what is it about the industry that is so destructive?
I think one of the most unfortunate things that like we've encountered, and not often, is like working with other artists. There's usually a camaraderie, and I think once in a while, very rare, but there's been like a couple times we've worked with an artist that kind of, not throw you under the bus, but like are very two-faced, and that's very rare. And I do think that is a result of the industry. I don't so much blame the art, because I think that's one thing that, like, I don't know, like all of our best tours have come because the headline artist has invited us on tour, and it's a friend relationship, and it's like you really have each other's back as an artist, because we know we're all in this together, and everyone's got even the artists that are doing really well, unless you're like those top 1%, they're still struggling. It's like everyone,
Except Taylor.
Yeah, well, I'm sure she has her struggles.
No, she's got her own thing.
Like,
I just meant,
even the artists we're opening for, that we would kill to be at that place, they are still struggling, and would kill to be at another place and stuff like that. So I do feel like, that's one mistake that like would be to like really not have a fellow artist back and just, stuff like that. I mean, it doesn't happen much, but I do think like we encounter that
No, that's a good point. And to just tail off of like the little joke I just made about Taylor, it's crazy because I've looked up to her as as a musician and as a female in the industry,
Mm,
and
mm,
I know what she's gone through in the past decade of, people talking about her body and her, coming out and talking about her having an eating disorder and things like that. And that's also a really big thing. And I think one of my biggest gripes and one of like my biggest pet peeves about this industry or any industry that is like in the entertainment world is commenting on women's bodies, commenting on anybody's bodies. It's just so wild to me that that's still a thing in 2024,
I know.
and then you're more subjected to it because you're on TikTok, you're on Instagram, you're showing yourself, and then the rebuttal is always, well, don't put yourself out there if you don't want the feedback or you don't want the commentary. And it's like, no, I didn't ask you, so
Yeah.
it's so wild to me. So that's, going back to that, but I've always been really, I admire like people like Taylor Swift, and
Yeah.
that just kind of don't care. Like they just kind of let it roll off of them. They're just like, I'm successful. That's it.
Yeah. Well, because I don't know what's going on in her psychology, but she
Right.
strikes me as being very. She's like she's been through it and
Right.
transcended it somewhat. Like she's taken control.
Right.
Uh, um, and but I'd imagine it still would be a very, very hard balance to keep, having that degree of fame, because again, back to Matt's point about comparison. Imagine, and then to your earlier point about aging,
Oh, I can't imagine.
you know,
Honestly.
that there'll be a use by date for that dimension of her performance, right? Um, and that's very difficult. But I guess that's true of many industries like sports and so on.
Well, right. Anything in that world where the world is watching, I guess.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, but that's interesting. The thing about having each other's back and the contrary of that. I've worked with a couple of bands where there's been a lot of discord inside the band, and it's so destructive, right? And it's all about ego, of course,
Oh
and
yeah.
and often about that competition for what's perceived as the limited opportunity, right? And so that's very difficult. Yeah, I think, and no doubt you've seen all the other things that we mentioned at the outset, the drug and alcohol thing, for example. It's so often pushed forward as an avenue for more creativity, or as an expression of the creative artist. But it's so destructive, of course. I mean, I'm not a wowser. Do you have that expression, a wowser?
No.
No. So a wowser's person is a bit like a Puritan, no
Okay.
drinking, no. So I'm not that.
Okay.
I do enjoy a good single malt.
I mean,
And
who doesn't?
that's well, some people don't, but I think
You're like, no,
I feel
people don't.
very I feel very sorry for them, but I think this issue of abuse and so much in order to and then all those other factors we were talking about. So let's shift now then to I'd be interested in your views about and how you operate in terms of creativity. So what do you think it is, and what do you do to generate it? I know they're huge questions, and I'll help you along as we go. But I'd be really, really fascinated to get your thinking about it.
Well, honestly, it's actually kind of funny because as we've been talking and Matt started talking about doing cover gigs and you were talking about creativity with other like-minded people, and I guess when somebody asks me, what is your process of creativity? Like, what is creativity to you? I've always thought of, this is how I write a song. This is how I do this. But I've never actually thought that just being creative amongst like-minded musicians and friends is also creativity. Being on stage and performing covers, like that is still, you're still being creative. You're doing different things with your voice, and you're inspired by their drumming and their guitar playing, and there's so many things. So I just like, in this little conversation we're having, had this like revelation of like, okay, creativity is not just originality. It's not just I'm writing this song, I'm doing this, I'm, you know, it's as a whole, it's music, it's how you feel inspired. And but I really do think that they do kind of go hand in hand. If you're not in a good place mentally, then you really kind of can't let yourself feel certain things and put it out there, I guess. You know, you don't want to, I mean, but I will say, on the contrary, it's like I have had moments of really dark days that I've had some really beautiful things come out of my mind, just to kind of get it out there. But at the same time, it feels very dark, and it feels very sad. And then sometimes you don't want to revisit those songs because it puts you back into that place. So it's interesting.
There's a few. I mean, the in the aesthetic industries, you know, like music and art and so on. It's not that people. They're often transmuting suffering into something beautiful.
Yes.
Right. That's quite different to mental illness. I wouldn't want to pathologize that. That's just like normal experience. But what you're doing, you know, like the poet, for example, is taking normal experience and making it available to others so that we can resonate and share with it, you know, or shed some light on it. And there's a therapeutic aspect. And again, I don't mean that because there's an illness, but it helps.
Yeah. Regardless if you have a mental illness or not. Yeah. It's like journaling. Yeah. It's like talking to somebody. It's all of
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And there's something about that process. Like it's like in my game, you know, in the therapeutic game, I don't do much, you know, like people fix themselves by articulating what their experience is, sometimes for the first time, by just slowing things down. And I think the creative process is something like that. Is there do you have a kind of practice though? Like, is it regular? Do you have a structure? And both of you can answer this, of course. How do you organize for it?
Yeah.
We have gone through moments where we've had structure, where we're like, hey, we're going to write this amount, we're going to get up, do this time. But I feel like we always kind of fall out of those structures because they're not sustainable. They don't always feel, I don't know, you can, yeah. I would love for you to.
No, I mean, I don't think we really have, I mean, most of the songs we've written together, so I think we kind of like fall into this rhythm of like, we know how to write together, but
it's comfortability.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I don't know, I never really thought like about being a creative person. I never thought I was that creative. It was just like, oh, I play guitar, I want to start a band, and then want to do original music, so someone's got to write the song, and then, you know, just go from there. And then,
creativity is forced.
You know, again, like doing kind of like indie pop, you like, okay, you try to get close to the artist you're listening to in the early days, and then I think like there was I think early on in the thing, it was just the two of us writing, and we were so dialed into that and just trying to get better. And then I think like the next big like step was when we did sign with Network, that when we would go to like LA, they would set us up for a week of like writing sessions with other people. And that was so foreign to us and really good for us, because like even if we didn't end up using those songs, even if I think the majority of our songs that we've made it onto our albums are stuff we've written together, but like the practice of, you know, for a week or 2 weeks or a few days, you would have 2 writing sessions a day, and you'd have this block of time with someone that you just met, and you know, had to write a song. You know, it was really good because then you kind of learn their methods and, you know, just feeding off other people. So I think that was like a big milestone. Like, hey, like, you know, we picked up a lot of tricks from that.
Yeah.
And then again, recently, I think it was so many years of only doing original music that now on the side doing some cover gigs, you are forced to learn, you know, if you're covering a song, it's probably a really good song. You know what I mean? Like it it was a hit to somebody, it was a very popular song to somebody, and I think learning those songs lyrically, the melody, the chord changes is really a great tool to go back to writing, and then your own stuff. So I think that's probably the most recent tool in the sandbox for us right now. It's like, let's learn a bunch of these songs and see why these are so popular. You can take a little bit from that,
Yeah, it's interesting. Just to dive into the psychology of creative process a little bit. There are two thoughts I want to get to here. One is to do with imitation, which I think is very important, actually. And the other is to do with diversity. One of the factors that I found in my research that predicts creative outcome is, I think, I gave it various names, but I'm sitting at the moment with cross training. When you go to the gym, you do cross training. You're doing various types of things. Creative people generally, they have passions in more than just the primary area, and those other things feed into that primary area, but also within the, if it's mathematics or if it's music or whatever it is.
Yeah.
They're a bit voracious. They consume. And the Chinese, for example, have a very different view of creativity than the West. They don't have that sense of stealing someone or copyright. That it just doesn't compute. It's just all about, we just build on. And so there's that sense in which taking famous songs and then learning, that then informs you, like literally informs you.
Yeah.
And then the next thing you write has got that as a part of the broad context, right? So there's nothing original in that sense, except that it gets transmuted uniquely through you.
Yes.
When I did my doctoral work, I interviewed fiction writers, novelists and playwrights, and I was interested in their creative process and what they thought about creativity, and I interviewed them, and of course they're bloody wordsmiths, so I couldn't shut them up. Like the interviews went forever because but one of the things that my transcripts were just voluminous.
I bet. That's so funny.
I don't know if you can see it, but there's two volumes here. The big one's the thesis, and this one here is just the transcripts. But a universal thing they said was they had this experience. None of them were mystically minded, but they all said something like, "I feel like the words come through me, not from me." That this sort of experience of being a conduit, as it were, that when they were really cooking, the stuff just comes, and it's not like I'm thinking about it. And I think that's the key. And we were talking before about social comparison, bringing the ego in. There's a kind of egolessness, like the absence of ego, that comes, and it's fed by this broad network of stuff that we've consumed, right? So everything gets used, and especially, Matt, things that have taken us outside our framework, right? Because then you've got a different framework with which to make sense of things, right? So I think that's a very interesting insight. What was the other thing I was going to say? There was that one. Well, can't remember now.
You said imitation, and then.
Oh, I know. The other thing is you'll just get better and better, right? Because if you stay at it, I mean, there's a lot of research in, first off, the single best predictor of creative process, creative output, good stuff, is how much people produce, right? So Picasso produced a lot of stuff. A lot of it, he didn't care. It was rubbish. He didn't mind. He was into the process. And there's a fantastic book called The Talent Code, a guy named Coyne, basically looking at people who are the best at what they do in every field. And one of the key things is how they practice. And they just practice because they like it. So it's connecting with the intrinsic pleasure of the doing rather than having the attention drawn to how good the product is.
Right.
Yeah, and all that comparison stuff before, that's what takes us away from the intrinsic pleasure. And that's what I was hearing when you were talking about, like, it's just the fun of playing with other musicians and doing something different and being stimulated by their ideas. Yeah. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. So the other thing is, can I ask you, I love asking this question. When you're really, when it's been really going well, when it's cooking, like you're really can you put your finger on it? Like, have you been able to identify, this is the big question, like everyone wants to know, what are the circumstances? Is there any pattern to when you're really creative, when you're writing well, when you're making new music? Have you noticed anything?
That's a good question. Well, it's kind of like, for me, it seems when things are doing well, so like what Matt said, if your song is streaming really well, or you got added to a playlist, or you're on a radio station or something, you feel that drive to want to do more and build off of that, versus if you put out an absolutely incredible song, the best song you've ever put out in your life, but no one gets to hear it. And then as much as you want to keep going, you're like, well, why am I gonna keep doing this if no one's gonna hear it? So for me, I feel the most inspired and like in that mode when things are going well, like you said, like in that way. Do you know what I mean? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, if you're talking about like creating and songwriting and stuff like that, I mean, I feel like I notice it more when it's not going well. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I don't notice it like, oh man, we're writing a good song. And I don't think I've ever really had that. I feel like if we're writing, I can remember more times where we're like, all right, we're working on a song, we're writing a song, or we're writing for TV and film or for another artist or for our album. And it's like, I remember the times when you sit down and it's just like, this is not good. And then someone's on their phone, or you just are thinking about something else and you want to be anywhere else, and every lyric you come up with, every melody you come up with is just shit. It just feels forced and pushed. I remember those, so I feel like I can put my finger on that more than I can like, oh man, we're in the zone. I don't think I've ever been like, oh, it's happening. But so like when it's not that, it's just it's more like it's just flowing and you're thinking about the song and but I guess that's just my experience with it.
I will say that you and I do work really well under pressure. So if somebody comes to us and says like, hey, you need to write a song or can you write a song for this show? This is the scene.
If you put like a deadline.
Yeah, and you have 2 days to do it, 48 hours, get it to us. We work really well in that way. And I've always been like that, even in school. Like, I would do my projects the night before. Like, I was always a procrastinator. I would always under pressure, I work great. So that's funny. That we're always in the zone when it's like that. But it's more the freedom of, hey, we can take our time and do this. That's worse.
Yeah. Well, this is a universal feature. Like, this is why workplaces have deadlines, right?
Yes, exactly.
If you don't, then shit doesn't get done, right?
100%.
But it's interesting, Matt, in that you're probably familiar with, there's a saying that creativity is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. And I think it was Louis Pasteur said that. And the key there is, again, back to that idea about productivity. Often it's not sexy, right? It's just this sort of working, and you're actually not noticing what you're doing. And here's an interesting thing, I think, and it speaks to that insecurity that we all have about comparisons to the people we'd really admire. we can't tell how good our stuff is. And what we think's like ordinary for others might be really interesting because it's just obvious to us because it's come out of our system, right? But then you show it to others and they go, oh, that's nice. So
Sorry, I'm so
you've
sorry.
got to go.
No. There's just somebody at the door. I'm still listening. Matt's right here.
Yep.
Fantastic. Yeah, so that's the other side of this. The other thing that Alyssa was saying before about, you produce a really good song and it doesn't strike. It doesn't. That's the weirdness of creativity as well. Sometimes things, it's just luck, isn't it? Landing it with the right people at the right time.
Yeah, and I think with that too, it's like we had one song that came out and didn't do anything. Feedback we got from like the industry people that we were working with at the time, like, oh, I guess nobody likes it, and that was one that we kept believing in and kept, still playing it live, still finding different blogs, different YouTube channels to send it to, and I would say, at least over a year later after it came out, it really picked up on YouTube with video gamers. They really, Big Bubble. They really like lash on the song. They would do remixes, nightcore versions of it, and that actually, I think that one's at 12 million streams on Spotify. It's one of our top songs. So it came later. Wow. I think too that is something. I mean, if you're an A-list artist, you put your song out, everybody hears it right away, so they can quickly decide if they like it or not. You know what I mean? Like if you are, you're one of these artists that we all know the name of, but I think for more indie artists, it's like you put a song out and there's a good chance that nobody hears it the first week. They might find it, at a different in their life. They might find it in a commercial in 5 years. They might find it, on a playlist 6 months later. So I think for more indie artists, it's definitely more geared to them that just because immediately, your label or your manager or the industry moves on from the song doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad song. At least that's from our experience. Oh,
no, I think that's definitely the case. And of course, the history of creativity speaks to that. Often people die and they're basically unknown. And then they might be one of the world's famous classical composers these days, right? So that's the other thing, is there's a lot of good fortune in it being picked up by the right people at the right time in the right circumstance, which again speaks to keeping close to our reasons for doing it in the first place, and maintaining the joy and the engagement and the immersion and the growth.
Right.
And on the other side of that, I can remember multiple times where this is our song. We get so attached to it, and then you look back like, it wasn't that good.
It wasn't as good.
The next song we wrote was better, so if we had just moved on.
It's so true.
I know. I mean, I feel like I'm really at the peak of my powers now, even though I've got less energy. But and it's just because I'm lucky that I can just keep doing and getting better at what I do. And I think you're the same, right? And you'll just keep evolving it, and that's the whole point.
It is. You're absolutely right, and it's really cool that there is no ceiling on that. You just keep going.
No, and I have a particular view, I guess, that creativity is really about connecting us to reality. That it's all about reality. It's about feelings, or it's about science, or it's about psychology, but it's giving expression to and helping us understand something very real and gets us closer to it. So I think there's a kind of spiritual dimension in that sense to it. It connects us to something, which is probably not a bad way for us to sort of bring our conversation to a conclusion. And just to say, what an absolute pleasure it has been to meet you both. I was listening to your music this week, and really blown away by it. Just moved.
Thank you. That is so touching.
What little hairs remain on my head were standing on end at times. So I'm certain that you just keep going. your success will blossom. And I think that's, again, the point. If you stay true to what you're doing and keep producing, it will just build, people will connect. Because you've clearly got useful things to say, important, moving things. So just wanted to share that with you.
Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it means a lot, and thank you so much for having us, and thank you for all that you do. It's really an honor.
Yeah, it's inspiring to hear, and I'd love to hear your take on things, and because we feel a certain way, and you're like, well, this might be why, and this is, and that's really cool. That is really cool.
Fantastic. All right, guys, and again, thanks so much for the time, and hopefully our paths will cross again.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so.
You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you'd like to know more, my website is www.drchris.life. And if you like the podcast, share it with people you like so they can like it too. And in the background of this podcast, you've been listening to a powerful and beautiful song called Peace by Roses and Revolutions.
Was there ever peace?